that door is closed to you. I learned that belonging is not guaranteed by leadership. Sometimes the person creating the welcome is the person being quietly excluded. I did not set out to lead organizations. I thought I would write about people. After college, I spent a year in Israel intending to become a journalist. As an intern with United Press International, I covered the growing conflict between religious and secular Jews. I watched buses stoned for operating on Shabbat. I saw arguments over open businesses become physical confrontations. I watched Jews turn their anger not toward an outside enemy, but toward one another. It made no sense to me. We were a people shaped by exile, persecution, and survival. Surely that history should have taught us how precious we were to one another. But history does not automatically make us kinder. Sometimes pain becomes wisdom. Sometimes it becomes a weapon. From my apartment in Jerusalem, I looked toward the Temple Mount and thought about the ancient teaching that the Second Temple was destroyed because of sinat chinam, baseless hatred against Jews. I began to understand that a sanctuary can be damaged long before its stones fall. It is damaged whenever contempt becomes ordinary, whenever gossip replaces conversation, whenever power matters more than dignity, and whenever belonging is offered only to people willing to become like us. I decided I no longer wanted to stand outside communities and write about them. I wanted to stand inside them. I wanted to understand what held people together, what tore them apart, and how repair might begin. So I began a career in Jewish communal service. I believed programs could become doorways. I believed a welcoming conversation could alter a life. I believed that if people were invited into relationships before being asked to prove their worth, they might discover that they had belonged all along. I still believe that. But I have learned that building belonging for others does not guarantee that people will make room for you. My father once planted 2 trees, one for my brother and one for me. My brother's tree grew straight and tall. Mine twisted. It curved one way and then another, as though it kept encountering invisible obstacles beneath the soil. For years, I thought my brother had received the better tree. His looked certain, mine looked confused. Now I understand. My tree was not confused. It was adapting. It was teaching me how to live. Bend where you must. Deepen your roots. Keep reaching. My father was a civil rights activist and an impressional idealist. He answered the telephone with shalom. He sang, "Give peace a chance" around the house. He refused to build a fence because he believed fences created unnecessary boundaries. My mother was the head of Adult Protective Services in Prince George's County, Maryland. She taught me that compassion without action is simply another form of looking away. From my father, I inherited idealism. From my mother, responsibility. From my career, I inherited a question. How do we build communities strong enough to withstand their own internal conflicts? For more than 4 decades, I worked in Jewish community centers, hillels, federations, synagogues, health agencies, and social service organizations. I created programs where strangers became friends, couples met, families formed, and neighborhoods became communities. I raised money by building trust. I developed partnerships because I believe relationships were not distractions from the work. Relationships were the work. But I also learned that every institution has 2 organizational charts. There's the official one, the one with titles, committees, and neat boxes. Then there is the invisible one. That chart is built from friendships, family history, donor influence, private alliances, institutional memory, and conversations held before and after the actual meeting. Many times I was responsible for carrying out decisions made in rooms I had never encountered. I was told to be warmer, but not too emotional, more authoritative, but not threatening, more polished, but not vain, more assertive, but less aggressive. I was advised to change my hair, shoes, makeup, clothes, tone, temperament, and presence. Apparently, I was one flat iron and a pair of pointy shoes away from organizational excellence. The advice was often presented as help. That is what made it so difficult to challenge. Control sometimes arrives disguised as mentorship. I was criticized for welcoming people who were not yet members, but I believed participation could lead to belonging, and belonging could lead to membership. I was told that my approach was too relational, yet those relationships produced programs, partnerships, donors, resources, and communities that lasted long after I left. People wanted the harvests. They did not always understand the seasons. I encountered financial secrecy, harassment, informal power, and boards unwilling to confront influential people. I learned that prestige is not integrity, a mission statement is not moral conduct, and silence is never neutral. Silence always protects someone. Usually it protects the person who already has power. I also experienced the quieter harm of exclusion, invitations that never arrived, conversations that stopped when I entered, decisions shaped in private, and concerns discussed about me instead of with me. Male misconduct was sometimes easier to name. It announced itself. Covert hostility from women was often more exhausting because it seeped into everyday life through gossip, alliances, omissions, and shifting expectations. There was no single incident to point toward, only weather. And when you live in that weather long enough, you begin checking every room before you speak. You wonder whether warmth will be interpreted as weakness and confidence as arrogance. For years, I believed resilience meant enduring it. I kept my head up. I smiled. I made jokes. I raised the money. I completed the program. I went home and tried not to let my children see how much an ordinary workday had cost me. And despite the predictions, I was not eaten alive. But eventually I understood that I survived is not the same as this was acceptable. Endurance has a shadow. It can become the harm an institution no longer has to carry because one woman has learned to absorb it. Sometimes I stayed too long. Sometimes I explained myself to people who had already decided not to understand me. Sometimes I made a joke when I should have made a record. Sometimes I offered compassion before I offered protection to myself. Sometimes I confused being needed with being respected. This is not a confession of weakness. It is a description of how many women lead when the institution controls the salary, the reference, the reputation, and the story told afterward. Resilience asks, how did she keep going? Repair asks, why did she have to carry this alone? Resilience admires the woman who survives the closed circle. Repair changes the circle. I have also known extraordinary mentors and colleagues, people who saw what was happening and refused to look away. One witness can change the moral weather of an organization. A supervisor can refuse to reward gossip. A board can insist on transparency. A colleague can choose conversation over triangulation. A friend can say, I see what is happening. You are not imagining it. Those words return a person to herself. That is what healthy leadership should do. It should not make people dependent on the leader's approval. It should strengthen their capacity to act with dignity. I've spent my career creating rooms for other people. Now I understand that I must create a room for myself. Not a room without conflict. That room does not exist. I want a room where I can be questioned without being erased, corrected without being remade, challenged without being isolated, and known without being managed. A room where women can stand beside one another without measuring whose light is brighter. A room where no one must become smaller to make someone else feel secure. I was not wrong to care. I was not wrong to welcome people before they knew the rules. I was not wrong to believe that trust could become generosity or that relationships could become resources. I was not wrong to ask where the money went. I was not wrong to expect boards to govern. I was not wrong to believe that a woman could lead with warmth and still be exacting, with compassion and still demand accountability. Shared identity does not guarantee shared ethics. Shared history does not guarantee mercy. The people who excluded me clarified the kind of leader I want to be. If I have gained authority through years of work, my responsibility is not to make the doorway smaller, it is to hold it open. Leadership is not the performance of invulnerability. It is not smiling while a room decides whether you belong. It is not counting how many indignities you can absorb before your body refuses to enter the building. Leadership is the practice of making reality more honest. Sometimes leadership means creating a program or raising millions of dollars. Sometimes it means asking the question everyone hopes you will avoid. Sometimes it means documenting what happened, reporting misconduct, leaving a position, or saying, "This is not acceptable and our values require us to respond." A mission statement is not a moral achievement, it is a promise. And that promise matters most when keeping it becomes inconvenient. Today, I no longer measure courage by how much I can tolerate. I measure it by how carefully I choose what I will tolerate. Compassion needs structure. Welcome needs boundaries. Trust needs accountability. Hope needs action. And belonging must be practiced, not awarded as a prize for conformity. My father's tree never grew straight. It bent around whatever stood in its way. I once thought those curves were evidence of failure. Now I understand that the tree was refusing to let the obstacle decide whether it would continue to live. My life has bent around exclusion, betrayal, harassment, financial uncertainty, divorce, relocation, professional endings, and the impossible expectations placed upon women leaders. But bending is not breaking. The turns become discernment. The pressure deepened my roots. The places where I was forced to leave became openings toward new forms of service. I do not thank the storm for making me stronger. I would have preferred to learn those lessons without the cost. But I will not allow the storm to erase what I created. I created relationships. I raised resources. I opened doors. I helped people find support, community, and one another. I chose connection repeatedly, even after connection disappointed me. That was not naive, it was brave. My career began with the fear that a community could destroy its own sanctuary. It continues with the belief that we can rebuild one. Not through a perfect leader, not through a slogan printed on a wall. We rebuild it whenever we refuse to make another person less human, whenever private conversations are brought into the room, whenever truth matters more than comfort, whenever a newcomer is welcome before she knows the rules, whenever someone says, "I see what is happening," and stays, whenever we choose one another without requiring sameness. For years, I ran around obstacles, through institutions, toward opportunity, and sometimes directly into whatever was charging. Now I am still moving, but I am no longer running merely to escape. I am moving toward something, toward communities that can tell the truth, toward leadership that does not require self-erasure, toward women who understand that another woman's strength is not a threat to their own, toward institutions whose practices make their values believable, toward the light my tree was reaching for all along. The tree is still growing, and so am I. Not straight, not untouched, not finished. Still reaching, still making room, still believing that the sanctuary can be repaired and that belonging is something we create every time we find the courage to see one another clearly and still say, "Come in, there is room for you here."